All right, folks, so it's 1 o'clock. We'll call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting, regular and closed sessions for Tuesday, September the 3rd, 2024, at 1 p.m. First order of business here is the agenda. So any questions about the agenda, queries, concerns? CIO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. An error on our part. Under new business, there is a consideration for policy review for community services, the flying flags policy. Would like that taken off the agenda for this meeting and brought back once Director O'Brien's with us to go through it, explain accordingly. So if that's okay with council, just to adopt the agenda as amended with that item removed.
All right, any other concerns or issues for the agenda? Then I'll seek consent for the agenda. Sorry, that's right. We talked about this and I totally forgot about it. So I can get a motion for the agenda. Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I move that we accept the Tuesday, September 3rd agenda as amended, held at 1 p.m. in council chambers.
And thank you on the motion. All in favor? And that's unanimous. So then we'll look at the minutes. Anybody have any questions or concerns about our minutes from last meeting? All right, so I'll take that as consensus for the minutes, and we'll move on to our first item on the agenda, which is a closed session for a delegation from the South Red Deer Regional Wastewater Commission. Can I get a motion on the floor to go into closed session under FOIP section 197? Councillor Ryan?
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Cummings. I move that we go into a closed session under FOIP Section 16, disclosure harmful to business interests of a third party, and FOIP Section 25, disclosure harmful to economic and other interests of a public body, with all in attendance.
Thank you. All in favor of that motion? Okay, that's unanimous. So we'll be going into closed session. I'm just going to read a little bit of a point here for those of you who are watching us on live stream. So for those of you joining us via live stream, the meeting stream will be replaced by a graphic while council is in closed session. When the graphic is removed, that will indicate that the meeting is ready to reconvene. And we shall take a 5-minute recess, I believe. All right, so we've come out of closed session into the open session here. We are going to take a 10-minute recess, though, while administration sets up for a virtual presentation from our next delegation.
Hi, Lawrence. It's Marcy. Can you hear us?
I can now.
Thank
Count, we have another presentation coming, so I'm going to let DAO do some.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next presentation, we our screen. Lawrence McSally is principal with KDW Architecture / Salis O'Brien. Last year, we issued an phase 1 feasibility use on our current sports. KDW Salis was the successful proponent, and since that time, for the most of this year, we've been working closely to report that already. So Lawrence is going to give us a presentation on their finding.
From your side, I wasn't sure.
Yeah, sure. If you could, we'll put it there.
Okay, I'll do that. Okay.
No.
Okay. So I had uploaded here. Sorry.
Okay, Lawrence, I think copies here work.
Not sure why I can't seem to get it to share. I apologize here. Right on your end.
Yeah, Lawrence, we have it up on our screen here if you're ready to proceed.
Yes. Okay. So let's the first slide. The complete at life cycle assessment for the existing facility had a 30-year lifespan. We looked at everything in all its components: the architectural site, structural, mechanical, electrical. We looked at for maintenance items, repairs, also life cycle considerations. And we also looked at changes in the code that has come into effect since the building was built. We also did, as a supplemental scope of work, a an accessibility assessment of the existing facility. We use the Rick Hansen Foundation standard to complete that. And then we also did a program plan assessment for you as well, meeting all the different user groups of the building, and kind of looked at a gap analysis of what our current and future needs versus what's there right now. Go to the next slide, please. So we did our initial project, started back last October. We made a couple of visits to the site in October and November. We interviewed facility folks maintenance-wise on the building. We looked at all the existing documents in terms of previous reports and all your drawings. And then we did interview with the main user groups at the site. Next slide. So the facility was constructed in 1979, as you may know. It's got about 114,000 square feet. You did some major renovations back in 2010, and the facility components are one larger ice rink, an auxiliary rink, and then the curling club facility, and then some support spaces on 2 levels. The next slide. So in terms of the 30-year lookout, like I said, we had looked at all the components, and we tried to establish if there's some major trends with when things have to get replaced or not in the facility. Since it is a 30-year timeline, sometimes things happen more than once. So items such as some flooring and painting and things like that have a much shorter life cycle period, so they may very well happen at least twice, even sometimes 3 times over the course of a 30-year period of time. Other items have a longer lifespan, so they may only need to be replaced once. It just depended on where they were in the life cycle at the time of our review. The next slide, please. So in terms of the results, we had identified what we call immediate items, which are things that either relate to code or some follow-up studies, or were related to accessibility items. So those are kind of things that we would expect to happen, or at least initiate within this year still. Items in the short term are the next 5 years, and we identified close to $6 million of work that has to happen then. A little less in the second time frame of the midterm. And then the longer term, which is years 11 to 30, again, another $6 million investment. So kind of where we found the facility is that over the next 30 years, based on what we saw this year, you need to reinvest about $15.7 million back into the facility to keep it operationally sound. Break it down by the different major components there. So if you go to the next slide. Kind of have a couple of pie charts here that illustrate this a little bit better. A lot of the items in the first 5 years are on the architectural side. It's more in line with things like doors and some exterior finishes, some interior finishes as well. The next 5 years after the 6 to 10, there's a big chunk there for structural, and that's largely due to the replacement of the slab and the 2 rinks, because they're coming due on their life cycle around that time period. So that would be the slab and also the brine lines that are embedded in there. And then when you go to the longer term, it starts to become a lot more of the mechanical items that are looking to get replaced, and then also significant amounts of architectural again. And that's, again, because I was saying a 30-year period of time is fairly long. So a lot of the finishes of the building that you replaced in 2010 are going to need to get replaced again in that time frame. So overall, it's pretty normal that the architectural components take up the biggest chunk. You do have a fairly large chunk for the structural because of those 2 slabs, and then mechanical, electrical kind of take a smaller percentage. So this is all kind of pretty consistent with what we would expect. The next slide, please. Then we looked at something called a facility condition assessment, which is kind of a benchmark that we use, and you can compare your building against other towns' buildings, and then either other buildings within your own portfolio. And it's kind of just a scorecard type of a factor. We just basically take all the deferred maintenance that you have in the building versus the replacement value, and then you divide it out, and then you kind of get a scorecard here. So things that are in the good condition or have 5% factor, fair is 5 to 10, poor 10 to 30, and then critical is anything over 30. So the next slide, please. So their facility is actually doing pretty well. Right now, it is in the fair category, which is a good place to be. Really the good condition is for very new facilities that are recently built. So it's very hard to keep a building in that good condition once it starts to age. But a fair is a pretty good place. So these factors here that we're showing are assuming that no reinvestment has been put into the building. So in other words, right now we're saying the replacement value for the building is about $60 million, matching exactly what you have today. We like I said, had estimated about $6 million. So if you did not put any of the $6 million into the building in the next 5 years, you still would sit at 10%, which is still in the fair category. And then likewise, if you didn't do any investment in any of the buildings for the next 30 years, you're still in a poor condition, but you can just see how it slides. So this gives an indication of what you did if you did absolutely nothing to the building the next 30 years, where it would be. So it's still not in a critical position. Next slide, please. And this is kind of another way of looking at it. As the building ages and declines over time, not due to lack of investment, its condition goes downhill. So I think that's pretty clear. Like having a car or anything like that, if you don't do anything with it, very good over time. So this is something that we don't want to have happen, but you're starting at a much better place than many, many towns in Alberta. The next slide. So we kind of divided up the items that have to happen for the next 5 years into 3 categories. Currently critical, which is the immediate, the potentially critical, which is the first year, and then not yet critical, 3 to 5. So this is kind of helping you to kind of prioritize your money. So if you go to the next slide, we kind of identified items that would fit into that priority number 1. So there's kind of some smaller ticket items here that they're not very major, and those could be ticked off kind of in the coming year. There was quite a few priority 2 items that come into place. That's where the bulk of it is. If you go to the next slide, then we kind of show the priority 3. And those are items that there's a fairly significant amount of money here. But what that means is that you could potentially push these priority 3 items into the next cycle of 5 years and into more of the midterm thing without much impact on the overall building. So that kind of gives a little flexibility as far as what you do now over the next 5 years, the 5 to 10 year period of time, and then how you look at investing money back into your building. The next slide, please. So the takeaways are that it's always the most realistic to look at the next 5 years because other things will happen to the building, over time. So if we came back and looked at the building one more time in 5 years, we would expect many of the same issues to remain, but it's possible there might be some new ones. So it's a kind of a dynamic situation. So you always want to update these at least every 5 years, just so that you're staying current with the building's condition and you don't let it cost you. And then, like I said, you can then make some decisions what's critical and what's not. So obviously, if the roof is in really bad shape, that's probably more important than replacing vinyl flooring or carpeting, because it's not as critical to the operation of the building. So that's kind of how we want you to look at our evaluation and then kind of make some decisions going forward. The next slide, please. So if we looked at the comparison, this is just another way of looking at it. Again, if we did nothing for the next 30 years, you're kind of sitting at that 26%. If we did nothing in the next 5 years, we're still saying in that 10%. We're right at the margin of fair to poor. But the next slide will show kind of how funding may impact all this. So we kind of did a couple scenarios here. We kind of said 100% funding, 75, 50, and 25%. So over the next 5 years, if you invested 100% of the funding that we're suggesting, so that's the $6 million, the building still will maintain in that fair condition, but it will improve, deteriorate slower. If you do 75%, it'll deteriorate a little bit more, but it'll still stay in that 75%. But then you can start to see that if you only fund 50% or 25%, then it starts to dip into that category. Just for illustrative purposes, we also showed that following 5-year period there too, years 6 to 10. So again, even if you're in the 75% funding, you're always keeping the building in the fair condition. So that's kind of that sweet spot that we always recommend people to kind of try to keep, the 75% funding. However, you can still make some decisions to defer some things to the following cycle. So if you look at the next slide, it kind of shows that, well, I'm sorry, there's one more here, that this is kind of more of a generic example of what we're trying to illustrate, so that, if you don't, okay, so this one here, so again, if you do it 100%, it's actually decreases quite a bit. You actually are able to take it from 10% all the way down to 6. The 75% funding has a pretty good recapture investment there. You start to, when you go to 50%, you're starting to see the deterioration start to kick in then. So you're actually, much better in your upper portion here. We have yet to find a municipality that can fund 100%, so I don't think there is such a thing. So I think it's always kind of in this, somewhere in this area between 75 and the 50% tile. But there's a couple other things that we're going to talk about that, impact this as well. Next slide. Let's go back to 2 more. Sorry, I'll just show you that generic one real quick. Yes, so this is kind of a very generic one. That the idea here is that, if you don't do anything and let the building deteriorate, you have a very big increase of investment that's required. So this would be a cycle. Say if we didn't do anything for 30 years, we're going to have to put a heck of a lot of money in the building to get it back up there again. But if we kind of try to do it periodically along the way, yes, the building is going to decline in over time, but it's going to be less dramatic. So you're able to keep the facility with smaller investments over time. So we'll go 2 slides over. Thank you. So the barrier-free study, for the purpose of what we looked at the parking lots, how you get in the building, interior circulation, services such as the washrooms, the concession stands, vertical transportation, wayfinding, and any emergency systems. So for the purpose of this, we identified almost $1.9 million worth of reinvestment, but we only put in the items that were in the higher category, high priority items, into this cost analysis that we did. So that was about $225,000. Next slide. Then the other phase of the project we were doing was the program plan piece of it. So we did talk with all 6 major user groups of the building. We looked at the auxiliary arena and the fact that it doesn't really meet kind of the current needs of the building anymore. That every size hockey rink was really what this facility needs to even meet the current needs and then also plan for some growth. The other deficiencies were there's lack of storage, office space, and there weren't a lot of multi-purpose rooms that could be shared amongst the user groups. Parking was identified as a pretty big problem on the site, that there wasn't enough spaces. You were kind of using overflow parking that was not dedicated to this site. There was limitations to growth on the existing site because of the parking situation. The number of change rooms in the building was not adequate anymore, particularly as the need for gender neutral type of facilities has increased over time. So, you have women's teams in there, you have the girls figure skating club is in there. So there's, that's changed a lot from when the facility was first built. And then accessibility is a real problem in the building because there is no elevator in the building. Everything is on the lower level. And so it's not only for access to the locker rooms and the rinks themselves, but also in the curling club, there's no access to the ice sheets down below either from the main floor. And since that has a pretty heavy user group that are more seniors, that's an issue there as well. So those are kind of the big gap pieces that we found from that study. The next slide. So we had the first option, scenario one, was just you don't do anything to the building. So that was kind of the do nothing option. But then scenario two was that we looked at saying let's do an expansion of the building that's there now. We proposed demolishing the auxiliary rink, building a new rink to the south, kind of changing the orientation of the building so that the main entrance is from the south. You have a new drop off of the kind of a circle that would take place there. You would through that major corridor. We would leave the existing washrooms in place. We would add 2 elevators, one over by the curling rink and one over here for the ice facility, and then be new office space. And we made some modifications to the concession area on this level. And then we had parking to the south and west, and then there was some existing parking that would remain in effect to the east. And then there was some discussion in some of the user group meetings we had that, at some point there was some consideration of some sort of a field house that might come at a later date. We didn't really get into the program aspects of that, but for illustrative purposes, we're kind of showing it here as a footprint. If you go to the next slide, we kind of show the lower level here. So again, this is kind of adding all the change rooms. This would use the existing ice plant. We kind of maintained that. So there's extra change rooms kind of along that to the right of the new arena that would take place. And then if we go to the next slide, we actually looked at a generic footprint for the new building if we did it all new. And since we didn't have any other sites to look at right now, we just picked the site that was to the south. This could go any place in the town of Olds, though. So that we actually looked at what it would look like if it was a one-story facility. So it would be about I can't make that out of my slide, but it's a fairly large building if you compare it to the existing. And then we could wrap it with, parking on all sides. So kind of as a generic thing, we wanted to illustrate that this could fit here as well. And that was using all the components that we identified. So that's 2 rinks, a new curling club facility, possibly increasing the stands at the main arena. The details there weren't really too heavily looked at, but it would have met all the program requirements and allowed for some future growth. The next slide, please. So then we kind of looked at the differences in the 2 scenarios. So scenario 2 is probably going to be a little bit cheaper. It's about $58.5 million. Scenario number 3 is an all-new facility, $85 million, roughly. But there are a lot of caveats that we have to talk about. The potential for costs going up with a renovation project are significant because there's a lot of unknowns that we don't know about the building that may come up as we get further into it. It has a higher cost per square footage than renovated building versus the new construction for that reason. You do get the 2 standard arena sizes from both options. You get improved viewing area for the auxiliary room, which was a problem with the current scenario. Right now that doesn't really work, the auxiliary arena. We got all the training requirements in the multi-purpose room and the extra releasable space that can be accommodated in both. And we were able to expand the concession area on the renovation. The big advantage of the scenario 3, as I mentioned, is that it's a little bit more efficient. You can do it all one level. You save the cost of the elevators. And then the building could stay in place until the new facility is built. So there's the potential of either demolishing the building, repurpose the building, or sell it, the existing facility. But you don't have to close it down until the new one is ready to go. So that's probably the most flexible thing, because the impacts of renovation would be fairly significant. Higher site development costs do come with the renovation, as I mentioned. It is going to have some impacts onto the operations of the current facility. There might be some closures. There would be no improvements to the existing arena, and that would be, a static piece there. So really the arena and the curling ring facility, with the exception of the floor getting replaced and the addition of the elevator, you would still have to make reinvestments into those portions of the building over the 30-year cycle. So that was all considered as part of our analysis. And then if you built a new one, you still would have to reinvest into the building, but you would then know that you have a newer facility coming along. So, the building was built, opened up in 1980, so you do have a facility that's in good operations, but it is aging. So you have to kind of consider that in the overall master plan here. The next slide. So for that reason, I guess we thought that there may be some options to really focus more on the replacement facility for a couple of reasons. We illustrated using the ore grounds here, but there are other options that you may have. There might be someplace over at the Olds College. Maybe there's another site that's between the town of Olds and an adjacent municipality, perhaps. So there's a whole bunch of different things that could be looked at there as part of how to compare this to your overall master plan. I felt that this might be a good one, is that your building is in fair condition. So with some reinvestment, you can at least get at least 10 years out of it without much effort. But, to keep your facility for 30 years, maybe there's going to be a point in time there where it may make sense for functionality reasons to really start to focus on a new replacement facility. Because new construction is always more cost effective than a full expansion. But again, at the end of the day, it's always going to be a matter of how much money you have available. Both facilities were able to, deal with the needs of the program. So that's really kind of a neutral thing there. But I guess kind of the last point here is there some sharing of facilities that may make sense in a more regional aspect that you may want to consider. So that's something we can't really answer today, but that's a potential that you might look at. The next slide. And then kind of related to that is, the demographics of the town of Olds. You don't have a huge population growth rate. So, really you're not going to have a very large increase of population. So that's why it might be reasonable to consider a neighboring town as being able to share the burden of some of this. But it has an active population, so there's a lot of interest in recreation facilities. So we think that your usage will remain high, not go down. So I think in that aspect, a reinvestment into the facility is warranted. The next slide. So what would you do next? So the next is the planning considerations. Is the facility worth keeping? You have a pretty good FCI score now. We did look at the programming requirements. So I think something has to happen there. I think really the second rink, a full-size rink, is really what you need to eventually move towards. You do have to keep the overall age of the facility in check there, because it is built to it, but you've kept up with the facility, so that's a lot of good things compared to many other municipalities that we look at in Alberta. You're in a much better position than many of them are. Most of them have facilities that are much older, from the 50s, 60s, and they haven't been reinvesting in them at all. So in many ways, you're in a better place. What's the best path forward? Renovation, expansion, or replacement. We gave you some considerations there. A lot has to do with where it's going to happen. Is it going to be on the site? Is it going to be a different site? Is it just for the town of Olds, or are you going to open this up to a shared, facility with other folks, other towns? And then how long should you wait? So, like I said, I think the next 5 years, if you can look at, a 75% reinvestment, I think that's a good thing. If you have to defer some of those items to the second 5 years, that's reasonable. But I think that first 10-year outlook, you don't want to get too skinny on the funding there, just to make sure the facility is kept up to date. but you'll always understand it's a dynamic relationship. So whatever money goes in makes the lifespan extend out. There may be some things that you could say, because like we did the slab replacements. Doesn't mean that the slab has to be replaced in the next 10 years. I mean, you might get another 15 years out of that. It's really hard to say. Right now, there's no major issue with it, but once you get to a certain age, if, say a crack was developed or becomes a major problem with the brine lines, you would have to do something to them. You could put a liner into the brine lines to kind of get you through another 5-year cycle. The cracking might never be bad enough that it's a problem for maintaining ice, so it might not be a huge thing. So that might be something you could defer quite a bit of time down the road. There's plenty of facilities out there that have, 60-year-old rinks floors, and they're still going along strong. But if that ever was to fail, it shuts you down for a whole season. So that's something to consider. So if you only have one rink, that's a potential that you don't really want to face. So that's always the risk factor you have to consider. So major things that have to be replaced that would shut your facility down, like a boiler or the roof, something like that. You don't ever want to push that too far. You want to keep up with that so that you replace it before it fails. And then some of the other stuff, you have a lot more flexibility. I think that's it. The next slide, I think, was just your questions. So happy to answer any questions you may have. If there was anything that you want me to talk about a little bit more, happy to go from there.
Well, thank you, Lawrence. That was a great presentation. I think a lot of useful information there. I'm going to open it up for some questions on the floor if anybody has a question. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you to Lawrence. Just, you mentioned, Lawrence, in one of your earlier slides, probably the big ticket item of a somewhat urgent need is the roof. I can't remember what it was at, 1.5, 1.6 million.
Yes.
So you guys have done an assessment of the roof. I take it, and it is critical, urgent, as in the next year or two for replacement?
I think it was in the first 5. I don't think it was in the first year. I have to go back to that slide. It was definitely in the first 5. I'll have to look there and see if it's in the. It's in the second. Yeah, it's not there. So it's in the next 5 is where we had shown it.
Yeah, I think it was in year 2025, you had
Yeah.
roof replacement for 1.59 million.
Right. Yes, so that's in the second, that's the priority 2. So that, we would look at that you would want to plan for that in the next 5 years then.
And a supplemental, and as you said then, like things like the refridge plant, which to me is a huge concern. I think you flagged the facility is about 45 years old. I don't know what previous corrective preventative maintenance has been done, but so when you talk replacing the slabs somewhere in the next 1 to 5 years, that basically is the refridge plant? Because again, as you said, who knows? Hard to say.
No, the slab is just the concrete and the brine lines that are in it. So the refridge plant is mechanical electrical system. So that's separate. So the refridge plant, I think we had the slabs. I believe we had actually put in the 10-year cycle. That would be so. That's so you always do the brine lines at the same time because they're embedded. So it's just the structure. That's just based on the age. So I think it might be the 3rd category then. Maybe it's in there.
And again, though, as you said, hard to say, and it's kind of a wing and a prayer and a cup of coffee, right? Cross your fingers.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't see it. We saw it when there was ice on. We didn't see without it off. So we haven't heard of any major leaks or anything like that, issues with the ice. So even if there are some cracking in the slabs, you can manage that. But it's usually when it starts to really have a problem with maintaining ice consistently across the rink is when you start to really have issues. And like I said, we've had facilities where there was some problems in the brine lines, and then we actually just did a liner inside of it, inserted that, so you were able to keep it going a little longer. But eventually, you are going to have to, and those are big ticket items. So, it's going to be about $1 billion to replace the main rink, and then about, 800,000 to replace the curling club. So those are, big numbers there. So that's something that we had in the structural piece there that'll, it'll have to be planned for sure in the next 20 years. Wouldn't go past that. And then we assume here that, you could probably defer the auxiliary rink replacement, obviously, if you're thinking of getting rid of the auxiliary rink, because you don't ever want to spend money that you're going to, that you're going to throw out the window. Like anything that you're going to do, if you're really thinking of putting in renovation to expand the building or replacing it, you want to kind of keep that reinvestment in line with that master plan that you have for the building. So you don't want to put something in that's going to be there for 5 years. But the refrigerant plant and things like that, yes, I would say that you should keep up with that.
So Ryan first.
Oh, thank you, Deputy
Yes.
Mayor Cummings. I'm through you to presenter. I can't remember. Sorry, Lauren.
Yes.
I
no,
just
go
wanted
ahead.
to ask you with regards to the barrier-free study, and I noticed that there is a portion included in priority 3 for 225,000. So that would be one portion of what you've put in on the order of magnitude of costs. How reasonable is it to do certain things in this building that is existing? Because obviously we don't have an elevator and we have stairs that go all over the place in the building. So accessibility, I'm concerned about with regards to going down into dressing rooms and being able to access different rinks. How efficient is it, or how is our ability to access and make changes in our current building to make sure it's more accessible?
Well, the elevator to the curling club is fairly easy to put in. We identified a spot for that, and it's probably more your immediate need right there, because right now there isn't a whole lot of space downstairs that you necessarily have to get access to. You don't have programs in place that are set up right now to have folks with disability participate in the ice facilities. So with the exception of the curling rink. So right now I would say that would be the higher priority than getting access to the ice surface on the main rink or the auxiliary rink. However, the washrooms are a problem. So right now, in the scenario that we had budgeted some renovation, or at least adding some unisex washrooms in that 225. But if you are going to do the renovation, we actually left those existing public washrooms alone on the main level, and we were actually adding new ones that were barrier-free then on the main level, and then making the changes in the lower level as well. So there's a couple ways of handling that, but I think right now the washrooms, those are the main points. So the access point, coming in the building where it is now is okay. There's some things that have to happen there. Some of the concession access and things like that, you can work around that a little bit, but I would say that an elevator, at least one, is probably something you need to do. Some of the modifications for viewing areas on the main arena weren't that expensive to do either. So that's a reasonable combination to make. So I guess it just depends on, which path you start to follow. And then, like I said, you want to, if you can make major improvements, you don't want to do temporary fixes all the time if you can get to a full solution in 10 years. So I think that, you have to spend your money carefully, but I would say the elevator for the curling club area probably would be the next best place for an elevator before you do the one in the main building.
Thank you. Just supplemental to that. So would you say within the one you have here listed for 2027, the 225, would that address washroom accessibility, or are you looking at, because that's obviously not going to build an elevator at 225?
No, that would be some washroom accessibility.
Thank you.
So that would be like a unisex washroom and putting that in. So we didn't illustrate that on the rent, on any of the master plans that we showed you, just because that was kind of going down the road of, we are going to make a, a renovation plan.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you to the CAO, just get the CAO to maybe look at the tea leaves a bit and a little bit of visionary look forward. So we have the region, or the rec master plan that was done a little over a year ago, year and a half ago. We have I believe, the Alberta Community Partnership Grant, which we will be applying for to perhaps allow us to get to phase 2 of the regional facility study. So a question to the CAO is, and piggybacking on pages 31 and 32, what are the next steps from his perspective, the town's perspective, and working with council? We've got a couple of major ticket items, or we've got some items here around running and maintaining the existing facility, but as well trying to figure out, as Lawrence said, minimizing our regret spend, perhaps going to a regional approach. I don't think a town of 10,000 people can survive without a rink. So either that means expanding our existing rink, building a new one, and or getting some regional facility. So just wondering how we kind of keep the momentum going here. How are we going to raise funds to replace the roof? And maybe that's our budget discussion, but a lot to unpack there, just looking for some high-level thoughts.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Wilson. Always appreciate it. It's a big question. Obviously, the funds to do the repairs, even if we take the 10-year perspective, what Lawrence just presented, they're not there. But we have to find them, certainly. The post-10-year perspective is where council really has to get involved and decide what that future looks like. Pre-10 years, I will find options for council to do those repairs. The roof actually just came forward this year, last week, for a emergent $50,000 emergency repair that we have to do. So it's obviously starting. But with the phase 2 of this, leading from this study, a grant is being applied for under the Alberta Community Partnership. So we have letters of support from Mountain View County, from Olds College, from the town of Bowden, from the town of Sundre, in support for that grant to study what does the future look like. And this is post 10 years. This arena will exist for a minimum 10 years, so we have to financially plan for that. But phase 2, a large piece of it, not the whole piece, is engagement, because we do have to, through council and through this phase 2, ask our community and our other stakeholders, like, what are you willing and able to pay for? Because this, obviously, nothing will happen without large amounts of grants from the provincial and perhaps federal levels, but the community has to be ready to take on that massive project, because it's going to be a massive project whether we renovate or whether we build a new facility. So phase 2 will start those conversations in earnest and hopefully apply a bit, hone Lawrence's work here into more precise arithmetic at the very least, and timelines.
See any more questions, but I do have one comment to make myself before we move on here. After reading this assessment and looking at the list of repairs that are needed here coming up in the future, I was pleasantly surprised. I thought that was falling into the earth myself from rumors I've heard about our sportsplex. It was momentarily about to collapse. So I think looking at this schedule that Lawrence has presented us today and saying that there is even a feasibility plan to keep this facility operational for 30 years, especially considering the slower growth rate of our community than expected. So maybe we don't need a third rink or such a facility. So I was very happy to see that. I do look forward to some of the strategic long-term planning for financing a replacement, because of course that does have to happen at some point. And I know administration is going to come back with a good answer to how long it would reasonably take to fundraise for a facility of this nature, because that's, I think, the first thing to say. We know what it's going to cost. How long will it take us to actually get money to do that? That would give us a better idea of a timeline than to say give him a timeline and say, this is how much you, or how long you have to go for. So that planning is, I'm looking forward to that. Lawrence, thank you very much for an excellent presentation again. I'm sure if we have any more questions, we'll pass them on to the CIO and he'll bombard you with them.
Oh, absolutely. Happy to help.
I'm sorry,
All right,
Mayor
thank
Dahl,
you,
do you have
everybody.
a question or? Okay. Sorry, Lawrence?
No, I was just saying, yeah, anytime I'm willing to help, so let me know.
Perfect, thank you. And Mayor Dahl, did you want to make the motion?
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation, sir. I move that council accept the Salis O'Brien Sportsplex presentation for information. Once again, thank you for your information.
Thank you, Mayor. All those in favor of the motion? And of course, that carries. Thank you again, Lauren. So we're going to move on to Part 5 of our agenda, new business, on page 34, 5A, the protective services. Talking about policy 408C. CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So policy 408C is just before the committee today with the recommendation to rescind the policy, given that it speaks to the Emergency Operations Center and its management at the current fire hall. We have since moved the EOC to the Operations Center to accommodate a bit more room at the fire hall. So the policy is no longer needed, and it is now contained within our larger emergency management plan. So any questions? Happy to entertain them.
Any questions on that one from the floor? No? Could I entertain a motion? Councilor?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I make the motion that the committee accept the administrative recommendation and request the policy for repeal be brought to a future council meeting for final approval.
Okay, we'll call a vote. Anybody, all in favor? Okay. All right, next up is policy 803C, the OCAO policy review, whatever the acronym. Help us out with the acronym.
Office of the CAO, everyone's favorite division. 803C is Council's donation, sponsorship, and promotional items policy, of which there is a budget of around $8,000 allocated annually, I believe. So the policy has is before council with two purposes. One is just the general format update, but also in red, as you can see, are a few additions largely to the policy based on how we have been operating requests, because as council's aware, I do have approval authority at $500 and under. Everything over that threshold comes to council. So we're trying to introduce a bit more structure and to provide both some rules for applicants and some expectations of people, because we do get a lot of questions about, can I request council support for this event, that initiative, and we're a little bit subjective right now in that nature. So a lot of the criteria are listed in the last section, and the other pieces are more just procedural. Like now, if you noticed the last OCAO report, I do provide a synopsis to council of what has been granted under the current budget and what is left. So that is included as, I think, clause 5. But happy to take any questions, and yeah, leave you to it.
Any questions on this new policy or rewritten policy? No? Then I will entertain a motion. Councilor Batts.
Thank you. I move that the committee accepts as presented the amended policy 803C and directs administration to bring it forward to a future regular council meeting.
Thank you, Councilor Batts. All those in favor? And that is unanimous. Next on the agenda is the Community Services Policy Review. We did amend the agenda to remove the first one, so we'll look at 902C, green spaces.
Thank you again. And this policy has no amendments, just an update for council. However, green spaces, given that is about a year or so old now, and we did since add the classifications of the sports fields also. We do plan on bringing it back to a future service level discussion later this month to gauge how the operational changes have been received by council. The policy itself, administration still likes how it is formatted, but if there's any comments on how it looks or how it is being executed, we're happy to have that conversation. But
Any questions from council? Mayor Dahl?
I just have a housekeeping addition or change for page 45. And just above 4.2 exceptions, where it states upon the death of the current.
Sorry, Mayor, we're not dealing with the flag
Am I-
policy.
oh.
We're the next policy down. We skipped that in the agenda?
You said that was okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. I can talk to them separately.
So I do have one question for paragraph 3.3. The town will maintain clearances on streets, sidewalks, and trails to balance tree shrub health with safety and operational needs. I think we do need to have some caveat in there that states that that's town-owned trees, not just trees in general. Or else citizens may believe that that's us going around and trimming their trees because they're interfering with sidewalks.
good point. And 3.3 specifically does bleed into our municipal enforcement regime and our community standards bylaw, because we certainly do trim private trees after owners have, property owners have been given notice to correct largely sidewalk obstructions of their shrubs and trees. But we'll take a look and see if, very least, we could reference the appropriate section in the community standards bylaw.
Thank you. Any other questions or concerns on the policy? Mayor Dahl?
Thank you. This is interesting, and I think it's a great choice. On page 52, where we talk about sports fields, I'm just wondering, we're always talking about as a council to use friendly, user-friendly words, and I thought that was a groomed thrice weekly. I thought that was a very interesting word, and I'm just wondering if we should keep it to the 3 times rather than thrice, or does council care? I just find it's not very user-friendly. That's just my own opinion.
We could change it to 3. That's fine.
Any other questions or concerns? Then I will entertain a motion for this particular bylaw or pass policy, sorry. Anyone? Councillor Daly.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I move that the committee accept policy 902C as presented and directs administration to bring it forward to the future council meeting for consideration.
Thank you. And all those in favor? That's passed. Next on the list is a corporate services policy review, the repeal of 802C.
I'm sick of talking, so I'll turn this over to Director Linderman.
Thank you. As it says in the cover sheet here, administration has looked at this policy and decided that it could be repealed, as we have to comply with Canada Revenue Agency anyways, and that's pretty much all that the policy says at this time.
Questions about that? No? Then I would entertain a motion, please. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Cummings. I move that the committee accepts the administrative recommendation and requests policy 802C be brought to a future council meeting for repeal.
Thank you. And all those in favor? That's unanimous. Next on the list is corporate services policy. No, we just did that one. Sorry. Infrastructure service policy review 702C, development security.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. This one is a little bit more meatier, but only by amending one definition. Proposed is the amending of definition for development security. At present, every development we have in the town of Olds that is submitted to us, whether it be a new fence, a new house, new business, 20-story apartment building, et cetera, et cetera. We require cash to be held essentially as security should something go wrong and we have to do some rectification work. That's what it's for. It's returned within, I believe, 12 months of the development being completed and signed off on by our safety codes officer. This development security works well for smaller projects, like I mentioned, fence and decks, where we do run into some minor issues that do require us to get involved, even though it's very, very rare. What we're finding now, though, and what other municipalities have adopted, is a bit more flexible regime for lower risk developments. So if I was to compare, as an analogy, a new 20-acre subdivision where you have streets and sidewalks and sewer pipes and water pipes being developed, and then obviously dozens of lots being connected to those services, that liability for the town, once we take ownership of those assets, is much more than, let's say, a 5-story apartment building, which is generally in an infill area, is not creating new streets or new pipes for us to own. They are connecting to our services. So what we see in places like Red Deer and Calgary, for example, the two policies we're able to get, and obviously we'll bring those forward to a future meeting when this, should council decide to proceed with updating this policy, is that for those, I guess, lower risk developments, providing the option instead of a letter of credit, in some cases, $1 million plus, the whole developers have to give us for a period of 2 to 4 years, depending on the project's life cycle. They accept a surety bond or something of a development bond. So basically an insurance policy that where the town's named, that should something go wrong, we have ability to collect on that. The issue is that it's not as quick and not as a sure thing as holding cash in place. But the other hand is that it is a lower risk for lower risk developments take on these types of insurance securities as opposed to cash securities. And two, it is part of overall trend to encourage, incentivize more development by realizing a lot of multifamily developments just don't pose the same infrastructure risk to the town as the traditional single detached developments have done. So hopefully that was clear enough, but happy to take questions.
Policy as a policy, I see that really is a required, and then the 3 levels of responsibility with regards to, and then it references we're going to make. And of course, there's the corresponding policy 702P that dictates all of the actual structure of how, what, and how much, and percentages, and all that sort of stuff. This policy is really just a stepping stone to the procedure, in my mind. Is that what I'm getting here? Because I'm not really seeing much in the way of actually, this is what we shall be doing. It just, this is the overall, we're going to collect money, and then these are the people who are in charge of that process, and the policy would dictate everything else. Or the procedure, sorry.
That's a fair comment. And the biggest thing the procedure does that the policy doesn't do, it has the amounts of the security, which is what everyone cares about. Well, let's say mostly what everyone cares about. And that is kept in the procedure because different developments have different needs, and generally it's between 20 and 50% we hold in security, for example. So 20 to 50% on a fence or a deck is not that much, for instance, but on a $10 million building, for instance, or a $5 million development of a new street, it gets into a large amount. So the procedure does have largely parameters around when they talk to each other. Second,
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Cummings, for you to the same. Would that not be part of, when you talk about procedure, would we not also be, no, development?
it's not deciding and charging for, or less what government pleasure of building in our municipality. So it is a
So I do have one more. You did mention that you had, it sounded like, the way you asked it, you had a difficult time finding other communities that had this policy separate. It's more of a inclusive into the land use by the planning documents that we have rather than a standalone. It seems like it could be all policy separate procedure. Sort of stuff.
it's a large part of land use can include it's policy for the procedure. That gray area, which always exists when something new is being built, it allows flexibility to it without having the process, for example.
Perfect, thank you. Questions from council? I could entertain a motion.
Excuse me, the motion to accept policy 702 and requested Mr. to bring it forward to a future.
So next is our most always conversations. I'm looking after this one for.
Our budget 7th, July 5th. It was an online survey. Slide on our demographics participant, just showing the difference between 2023 and 2024. Number of respondents this year. These next couple summary of the top results from each question within the survey. Details on each question can be found. Run through these really. So property crime with 86, top police priority, and site 58%, focus of resources, our solid waste service level changes, amenities and services priority, green. The aspect of the community most funding and support is child and youth services, social media 80% is our and at 40%. The key priorities of our business retention at 6%. The role the town develops is at 50%. Housing is required, single-family homes. Areas allocate more infrastructure and parks and rec. Reducing at cultural arts programs. Ways found within the report, both in the comments, include a concern with increased property taxes versus a perceived decrease in services. So many of our residents and business owners pay higher taxes while receiving fewer services. More work needs to be done around communicating how property taxes are spent and the growing demands being placed on town operations through inflation, provincial funding reductions, and provincial. Road maintenance, a top priority for our citizens. So significant concerns, citizens would like to see more funding allocated and more effective and efficient repairs being completed. Green space maintenance was highest within our parks and recreation. Green spaces, which includes our trails, playgrounds, and parks, was chosen by 76% of respondents as a top priority among amenities and recreation services. Our policing priorities largely confirmed Council's recent update, but public safety remains a key concern with specific calls for more effective bylaw enforcement and visible policing. On a positive note, 63% of respondents indicated that they were satisfied with changes made to our solid waste service levels, 25% were neutral, and 12% were not satisfied. There were two specific questions asked in relation to housing. The first question centered around the role that Town of Old should play in attracting housing developments. 59% of respondents chose reducing red tape and other barriers to housing development, with only 15% of respondents stating that the town should have no role in housing. The next question asked, what type of housing is most required in Olds? Rentals were a top area of focus with 40%, followed by single-family homes at 28%. Within the comments, citizens emphasized the need for more diverse housing options, including affordable housing to attract businesses and support community growth. In economic development, there was an overall positive change from previous surveys, with 64% of respondents stating that the key priority for the incoming economic development strategy should be business retention. So moving on to our next steps. So following this meeting, the full budget survey report will be posted on our website for viewing. Next up, we have a coffee with council coming up on September 12th at the Olds Farmers Market. Any residents with questions, comments, and/or concerns on this survey are encouraged to attend. Following that and leading into October, council and administration will begin service level discussions where these key focus areas will guide council through the 2025 budget process. And now I'd open it up to any questions.
Thank you, Director Lindeman. Do we have any questions from the floor about the budget survey? Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to the director, just one quick question. Maybe I heard it wrong or misread it, probably both. Was there a mixed message? I thought one slide showed an emphasis priority on single-family housing, and then your very recent slide said rental housing was a focus.
Knew you'd catch that one. Yeah. So rentals, it was apartments and housing were separated in the survey. When you add them together, it is 40%. Separately, single-family homes was the highest of all the different categories. It's on page 7 of the report. I don't know if you, but when you add it together, rentals is the key focus at 40%.
Any other questions, Councillor Ryan?
Yeah, I think I thank you, Deputy Mayor Cummings, sorry, through you to Sheena Lindeman. I was just wondering if we could talk about what the others are. Like, there was a couple of items on our list that had other, where was it here? On page 68 of our agenda. And I'm just wondering, there's 52 others, and I'm not sure, is there anything that we could point to say what the other was? And then below there is another graph saying other at 64 responses, and I'm not sure what, maybe just if you have any examples, if not, that's fine, but.
Those would have been specified within the comments, so I'd have to look through there and see, but. Yeah. No, but I can put that together for sure and bring it forward.
And just a general comment, and it kind of goes to what Councillor Wilson said on page 61, where we have property crime as a number one thing. I noticed that traffic safety was at the bottom at 146, and then on the following page, what would you like our ME to focus on, and safety was number 2. So it's got traffic safety is number 2. So kind of like one didn't go along with the other. It seems to be a conflict there in the totals, but yeah, I guess it's all in what people provided with what their comments were, I suppose, on those particular items, were they?
And I'm wondering if when faced with other options, right? So for the policing priorities, the second choice, I believe, was drug. If you just scroll down a little bit. Yeah, and so I think between your choices, right? Between what ME and policing. Right.
No other questions seem to be coming from the floor. I'd like to take a look at 68, page 68 of the presentation, of the data. And when I look at these charts, I see a lot of alignment with what we've set up as priorities in the community already. We're spending a lot of function on infrastructure and making sure that that's correct, along with the safety and police officer policing. So I'm happy to see the citizens are concerned about the same things, or we've been able to match up with what our citizens are concerned about in our policies that we've been creating lately. So if there's no other questions, I'll entertain a motion to accept Director Lindeman's presentation. Councillor Butts?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Cummings. I move that the 2025 Budget Survey Report be accepted as information.
And all those in favor? That is unanimous. All right, so we're going to go to the next motion, or the next part here, 5G, which is a continuation of the discussion of the notice of motion for council salary and council remuneration policy 106C. Do you want to, the CIO will make some comments here before we move on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is before council again today after July, I believe it last came, with a few directions for administration, including a sample elected official budget based on what it would look like under a salary model, the committee weighting system, which I did send to council in advance and received some good feedback on corrections on that. That would be more factored into our organizational meeting and procedural bylaw. And then what you see, rewrite of 106C. So last time we met, there was a fair bit of conversation around the third-party commissions that pay honorariums or per diems directly to those appointed members. So in our research, Director Lindeman found that the City of Lacomb's council remuneration policy, which was very similar to what we had envisioned, and in that specifically, the commissions were factored out. And upon further conversation and research, we concurred that it would be probably too administratively complex, if not politically complex, to keep that in our proposed policy. So that was removed, so you'll see in this policy commissions are separate. Outside of that, I believe things are largely how we left them last time. And Director Lindeman, anything else to add to my summary? No? Okay, well, that's for the committee's consideration.
We'll open up for some questions on the floor. Councillor Ryan.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Cummings. I just have one quick question to the CAO, and that is, just to clarify in my mind, then because there is the elected official budget plan that we're still doing, so the conferences and that is separate from the salary that you're looking at, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Daly?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Through you to CEO. Could you elaborate on the commission's payment and stuff? Are they going to be paid to the town and then going into the budget of the town, or are they still going to be paid directly to the council person that's attending the commission meetings?
Right. Under this proposed policy, it will still be paid directly to the council member by the commission. So following the City of Lacoma's model, it became a bit complex to administer that town program. So we decided to propose this to council that we would continue status quo as the commission stand right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and through you to the CEO. And then further to Councillor Daly's question, I guess it would be under council's purview, depending on how and where this proposed salary change goes, regardless, I guess, of whether it goes through or not. It would be under council's purview when we disclose quarterly, I think, our council remuneration to include, I'll call those third-party payments, right, commission payments, because right now they aren't part of our disclosure to our citizens, right? So, okay. Yeah. Thanks.
I'm going to take a wild stab at that and just say that I've been made aware that there's a whole bunch of other policies that would have to be amended because of the 106C policy, as well as some procedural changes. If we as council want to decide that that has to be included in our online presentation of our remittance, then we just have to say that, and it shall be. So that could be covered easily enough, I think, right, Sia? Yeah. I see no further questions. I do want to make one comment. I know that there's a couple of errors in the agenda package for the spreadsheet on the boards and commissions and committees. I know I've submitted a couple of corrections for the committees that I'm on. I'm sure everybody else has done the same thing. So I know, Brent, you sent out a revised one. I think there's been revisions to that one as well. So just on some, like, for instance, the Waste Management Commission no longer meets once a month. We only meet 5 times a year. So that makes a significant difference, I guess, in that sort of stuff. So just some updating on that ABC chart. So if there's no other questions, I will entertain a motion to bring this back to council for final discussion and passing. Councillor Wilson, since it was your motion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and yes, I'd make the motion that the committee accept the salary model presentation as information and direct the administration to bring it forward to a future council meeting for consideration.
Thank you. Any other debate or questions on that? Mayor Dahl?
Just further to your comment, Deputy Mayor Cummings, I appreciate your comment. There has been updates as indicated by our ledge clerk to send to her, so has the changes that'll be updated.
Okay. Any other further debate on the motion? Oh, okay, I'll call the vote for the motion. All in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I'm just going to switch back over to the agenda here. So that leaves us to our final closed session. So I will entertain a motion to go into closed session. This will be with just council and the CAO and no others. Councillor Bryan, would you mind putting that motion on the table for us?
Sure. I move that we go into closed session at 3:23 PM for FOIP Section 17, disclosure harmful to personal privacy. And we'll have all of council as well as the CAO in attendance.
Thank you. All in favor? That's passed unanimously. So I will again read our little message here to our viewers. For those of you joining us live or via live streaming, the meeting stream will be replaced by a graphic while council is in closed session. When the graphic is removed, that will indicate that the meeting is ready to reconvene. Thank you, and welcome back to all of our viewers today. So we have reconvened from our closed session. We do have a couple of Ryan reports. I'm going to call on Councillor Heather Ryan with our first one.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Cummings. I move the council accept the presentation from SRD RWC for information.
You and all in favor? That is unanimous. So I'll call on Councillor Daly for our second Ryan report.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I move that we accept the CAO's report on personnel for information.
Thank you, Councillor Daly, and all in favor? That again is unanimous, and I adjourn the meeting today at 4:30 p.m.